First, live, local. This is Fox 12 Now.
Hello everyone, welcome to Fox 12 Now. Thanks for joining us. I'm Greg Nibbler. If it's your first time, we appreciate it. We're live streaming on the Fox 12 Oregon apps and website, a number of different places, and we get to have longer forum discussions and segments here where we can dig a little bit deeper into some big topics at hand. This is one that I myself found fascinating when I saw this. And this is roughly, we're going to get into the science behind this. We're going to get into what is actually going on. But roughly what you're seeing on this screen, potentially a 12,000-year-old piece of clothing was discovered in Oregon. This could be the oldest piece of clothing in existence. We're going to talk about that, where it was found, why this is important, all the details, because we have the person behind it right here with us, Richie Rosenkrantz, archaeologist, and I'm sure a lot more from University of Nevada, Reno. And Richie, thank you very much for being here today. Before we even get started about this story, and I've got pictures for everybody, so don't worry, you'll get those too. Could you tell us just about yourself and your work that you do?
Sure, yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me on, Greg. It's great to be here talking about things in Oregon to Oregonians. Yeah, my name is Richie Rosenkrantz. I am from the University of Nevada, Reno, but I'm also affiliated with the Museum of Natural and Cultural History here in Eugene, Oregon, as kind of a research assistant there. And a lot of the co-authors on the paper are employed by the University of Oregon. I focus on late Pleistocene archaeology in Oregon, specifically stone tools and perishable technologies, and how this interplay of culture, climate, and technology kind of intersect through time.
Could you give us some context there just for late Pleistocene era, when that is, like how far back that goes?
Yeah, so the late Pleistocene is really the last ice age, and that's kind of the colloquial term for it. It ended about 11,700 years ago. And so when we're talking about here in North America, we're really talking between about 18,000 and 11,700.
Okay, so that time frame, and what was going on in the state of Oregon, or what would have been the state of Oregon then?
Yeah, well, it's pretty variable depending on where you're at in the state, because as we all know, Oregon's pretty diverse in its vegetation and physiography. But where we're talking about in the Great Basin, it would have been much colder on average all year round, about 5 degrees Fahrenheit on average. And we think of, if you've ever been like east of Bend, it's pretty dry out there now, right? It's high desert. In the late Pleistocene, it would have looked pretty similar, except pine trees would have been growing a lot lower. There would have been more abundant marshes and shallow lakes in the valley bottoms. And subsequently, it was colder, but actually kind of a pretty good time to live out there because there was a lot more water availability.
Interesting. So even though it was that cold, it still wasn't it wasn't a terrible place to be living.
No, people thrived.
So tell us about, this treasure trove of things that you found. Can you walk us through, where this is, how this discovery was made?
Sure. The paper really includes some data from like 3 different archaeological sites. One of them is kind of where the clothing or possible clothing comes from. They're all within about 100 miles of each other, southeast of Bend, about an hour and a half, about 80 miles in the Fort Rock and Chihuahuan basins. Yeah, so Central Oregon, essentially.
Okay, and how were these sites located originally?
Sure. Oh, that's a good question. So all 3 of them have kind of been known about since Euro-Americans have been around. They're pretty kind of prominent on the landscape, and early on, people understood that Native Americans used caves in the past. And so Cougar Mountain Cave, which is where the sewn hide comes from, was excavated by a non-professional in the 1950s. And then the other 2 were excavated by the University of Oregon over the last 20 years as part of archaeological field schools. And so they've kind of been known about for a long time, but archaeological research on them has been really in the last 20 years. And that's Cougar Mountain Cave that you're seeing, and the Conley Caves, and then probably the Paisley Caves is next.
Yep, yeah. Paisley Caves right there. Okay, yeah. So all of these different caves. And so let me get my other screen back up here. But so that gives everybody just kind of a visual there of what it is that you're going into. So when you go into something like this, and you mentioned that they've been known for a long time, how is it that you're finding new things or even re-examining things that are already in there?
Sure. Well, Cougar Mountain Cave was kind of not really available for research until recently. And so we knew these things came from the site, but because it was excavated non-professionally, we didn't know much more than they came from that place. And so we were able to apply a variety of scientific methods, radiocarbon dating, the identification of what animals the hide was made out of, identifying the plant fibers and the wood, and really bringing kind of new life into these items that have been known about, but we didn't know much more than that they existed. If that makes sense.
It does. And so, what? How did this determination go through as far as? I guess and forgive me for not knowing the correct scientific way to ask about these things. But when you're taking a look at these, tell us what you see and what is it that makes you believe that this clothing could be 12,000 years old?
Well, we know it's that old because we did a thing called radiocarbon dating, and radiocarbon is an element that's very abundant in the atmosphere, and there's part of it that is radioactive, and so it decays. All that means is that it decays over time, and so we do some fancy scientific analyses and calculations, and we can back correct for how old something is back to about 50,000 years ago. And so we did that on each one of these items, and because they're made of plant fibers, there's plenty of carbon in them to kind of do that back correction that I'm talking about.
Fascinating.
And that's one of the things that sets Cougar Mountain Cave apart in the sense that these things are preserved and allow us to directly date them in that way.
What is it about I have questions about so many things you just said, but what is it about Cougar Mountain Caves that makes it such a good place for preserving items like this?
Well, all of these shelters are dry rock shelters. And so water, wetting, drying is the primary means by which organic things break down and become, dirt. Organisms eat them, etc. So in all of these shelters, especially Cougar Mountain Cave and the Paisley Caves, things just preserve because it's dry and there's no wetting and drying occurring over, thousands of years.
And so what could these items have been?
Well, particularly the sewn items, the sewn leather, it's a pretty small fragment. It's only about 3 or 4 inches, Those scales on those images are centimeters, but so we can't say for certain that it's 100% a piece of clothing. It's either a piece of clothing or perhaps a piece of footwear, a moccasin of some sort, or it could have been something like, maybe the edge of a tent or a bag. But the key thing here is that it's fiber cordage sewn into the edge of leather, and probably the oldest example that's ever been found of that.
Yeah, I was going to say, so talking about that in context, this could be the oldest example of any kind of sewn material that exists in the world.
Yeah, and I know that seems hyperbolic, but things of organic items like this in the archaeological record anywhere in the world are extremely rare. And we have all sorts of kind of indirect evidence of this going, no, it's not that this is the first piece of clothing that ever existed. That's not true. There's evidence of clothing production in the form of odd bone needles and figurines of people wearing things that go back 50,000 years in parts of Eurasia. So this is really just this like special place where this little bit of some piece of sewn leather got preserved for 12,000 years.
And so happened to be here.
Yeah. And so there's probably at some point someone will find some that's a little older, but right now this is the oldest example that I can find.
And what's the reaction been like since you posted this paper from just the public and the scientific community?
It's been overwhelmingly positives that I've heard so far. A lot of, I'm of course part of various listservs of my colleagues who study the people of the Americas or Great Basin archaeology, and everyone's been really supportive. And I think people who don't work, out here in the Desert West realized quite the preservation and age depth of the things that we have. So it's been pretty exciting to share it with everyone because it's been kind of this labor of love for me for years now.
Is there the potential for more discoveries in these caves?
Moving forward, probably not. We've done all the excavation pretty much, and we're still working. The ones that we've done professionally are a long-term effort. We've published a lot of papers about them already, and there's ongoing analyses. So I guess maybe yes is the answer to your question, but we're not doing any more work out there. It's all collection space.
How does it feel for you, having this as your career, to be one of these people who discovered this, who is part of this?
Yeah, being an archaeologist is pretty fun, and of course, like most archaeologists, my story is as a kid, I wanted to be an archaeologist, and so I'm very privileged and lucky to be able to do that. And I think one of the things about archaeology that most people would say too is whenever you find something that someone made, let's say 10,000, 12,000 years ago, and it's a pretty special feeling to have that connection with them. It's been that long, and it's hard to imagine or even fathom that amount of time, but it's the reality of things. It's pretty great.
Yeah, that somebody had their hands on that at some point and made that, put that together.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. What happens now? What happens next with these samples, with these examples?
Everything is housed at the respective museums, and there you can go visit them. Especially Cougar Mountain Cave is at the Fayetteville Museum in Klamath Falls, and then our work at the Paisley and Conley Caves are here at the University of Oregon.
So people can actually go put their eyes on these.
Yeah.
All right, that's cool. Anything else that you think is important for people to know about this work?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's really two things, and it really is about connecting this to the living indigenous people of Oregon today. Some of the ways that the matting and the baskets were made at Cougar Mountain Cave 12,000 years ago, it's a technique called twining. Klamath and Paiute people were making those at contact and post contact, and still today. And so there's few places in the world where you can look at a technological and cultural tradition and connect it over 10 or 12 millennia. And that's really special. And I think it really drives home how close ties and deep ties that indigenous people in Oregon have to Oregon. And two, similar to that, over 12,000 years ago, one of the most exciting things about the paper that I like is the identification of the plants, woods, and animals used to make all of these items. And it's over, let's see, 8 different types of wood, 4 different types of plants, 4 different types of animals. And it really goes just kind of this, something that we can assume, but it's really amazing for me to show it, this like really deep, complex traditional knowledge of the ecosystem around them and how to, not just skid by, but to thrive in a really difficult time and place.
And you can tell all of that just off of these findings.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's incredible. So what was life like, speculatively, what was life like for these people?
Sure. Well, it would have been probably, and this is using my expertise as an archaeologist, and so it's limited in what all I can say. But, it would have probably been pretty seasonal, especially winters would have been particularly hard. And I think, especially one of our sites, and I talked about eye bone needles in the paper, that this was kind of a fall time activity where you get ready for the winter by producing your clothing for the winter. And so your food and where you're staying and where you're going is tied to the seasons. It's tied to the food and shelter that you can get at those different times. And it's not surprising that people had such an intimate, deep knowledge of all of this, because that was their home. They were relatives to these things, right? And so fall time, you would have been prepping for the winter. Winter, you would have been hunkering down, doing what you can to get through the really cold Ice Age winters. Spring would have been really important to the green up of all the plants and things thawing out. Summers would have been for meeting up and getting food and making new relatives, etc. And the cycle continues, right?
Interesting. Yeah, and some of those tie-ins too to modern times as well. I mean, I think that's really, really interesting stuff. Well, what's next for you?
More of this. Have long-term research focused here in Oregon, and not just in the Great Basin, but also on the plateau, and teaching field schools to tribal members and to university students to make the next generation of archaeologists.
Wow, amazing, Richie. Thank you very much for having time to talk to us. Thanks for what you do. Thanks for bringing this information out. Congratulations on that, and I'm excited to see what you find next.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thanks, Richie. And for everybody watching, again, this is Fox 12 Now. We're live streaming here out of the newsroom. If there's any breaking news right now, if you're watching live, it's 3:15. If anything happens in the next 45 minutes, I'll be here with that breaking news. Otherwise, our 4 p.m. news will take over. But you can watch all of these segments on the Fox 12 Oregon app. So wherever you found us right now, definitely check those out. We get to have some great conversations like we just did right there, talking to